then everyone in Red Pill was anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia. And I'm like, how are you fucking pro-Russia? That doesn't make any sense to me. Of course they invaded Ukraine. There's no possibility that they weren't going to invade Ukraine. There is absolutely no way.
Am I hearing this correctly? A member of the manosphere calling out all those Putin fanboys for being complete muppets. Привет and greetings from Odessa Mama on the shores of the Black Sea. Behind me is the Odessa Opera House, quite a beautiful building and a landmark here in this city. So in this video, as you've guessed, I'm going to be reacting to Michael Sartain and his take on the Russo-Ukrainian war. And if you're wondering why I have such an opinion in general, why I do these live streams on my channel about geopolitics, in addition to lifestyle here in this part of Europe, I dub New Europe. I'll link a video up above in the card down below in the description if you want to know more about what New Europe is. It is because I have a background in international relations. I went to the premier graduate school for international relations in the world, and I have a specialization in this region. On top of that, I speak the local languages in this region, and I've been living here in the region for, on and off, for about 10 years, been many times to Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, in addition to the other countries that I cover on my channel. And yeah, I also have a background in strategic studies, worked for the European Union institutions back in the day, so I can give you a unique perspective on this war, this conflict that at this point has been going on for over 2 years. In fact, it's been going on for over 10 years if you start that in 2014 when Russia first invaded Ukraine since its independence, when they seized Crimea illegally and also started the war in the Donbass region in the east. So let's get into this video. Поехали! So I'm going to react to Michael Sartain here. He speaks at length on a podcast called the Purple Pill Pod that I'm not familiar with, but let's see what he says about the Russo-Ukrainian war, and in particular the Red Pill reaction to the biggest war in Europe since World War II.
I share similar concerns with you because I was a little surprised too in the red pill space. A lot of people supporting Putin because we're giving money to Ukraine.
Jesus.
There's valid criticisms about us funding Ukraine.
Yeah, of course.
Or against funding Ukraine.
I'm totally fine with those criticisms, but
there's no
this pro-Putin shit is nonsense.
Yeah, it's complete stupidity, and I'm not really sure.
Definitely agree with him there.
Do you think there's a strand of anti-Americanism that's just considered hip and popular now, that would just follow by default?
I think it's Twitter bots that's pushing Americans into it.
Well, we have actual personalities in the red pill who are saying, so they're just not bots at this point.
That is true.
So who are these people? Why do they believe this?
Putin kind of reminds them of Andrew Tate.
Okay. Well, I guess they have a penchant for walking around topless.
That's what I've actually heard from some of these people.
Yeah.
And Andrew Tate has spoken in favor of Vladimir Putin, and I think that's where a lot of this is coming from.
All right, so this is basically his hypothesis, Michael Sartain. It's because of the influence of Andrew Tate that so many of these red pill creators who give dating advice who are popular here on this platform, YouTube, that is why they support Russian fascism and Russia's war against Ukrainians. I think it's a bit of a question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, because why does Andrew Tate support Russia in the first place? Well, that's because, well, he supports a lot of fascist causes. And is that influencing other red pill creators just to support fascism, or are they already predisposed to it? Do they already support it, and then it's just part of their clique to support Russia? I mean, Michael Sartain is one of the big exceptions within this kind of men's dating advice sphere here on YouTube, who is calling it stupid. So yeah, a little bit skeptical that's the reason.
If I ever get a chance to interview Andrew, this is something we're going to talk about. Like, I just don't, like, guys, you're sitting there listening to Russia state that the Ukraine has been taken over by neo-Nazis. By
their Jewish president.
How in
running this
God's name do you fucking believe that? It's so good. Because you know what? Who's been such a great defender of the Jews is the Russians. Man, they've been, what an incredible defender of the Jews. Come on, man. You can't be that fucking stupid.
Yes, they can, because there isn't much logic to their arguments. They support Russia because they support fascism and Russian fascism. And killing Ukraine is just part of that. So, yeah, for me, it makes more sense that they're predisposed. You just have to look under the comments to Michael Sartain's videos when he speaks out against Russia or he's negative, criticizes the Russian government for the war. And you will not see very many comments supporting him. You will see them nearly all against him. And that's because the audience of this Red Pill content in general supports fascism. There are a lot of young, frustrated guys, and they're looking for someone to blame. So I think the big problem is that to be successful, you don't build a big audience. You have to be basically telling people what they want to hear, play to their biases and what they believe, their own beliefs to a certain extent. That's what Red Pill does. It basically is pretty much a fascist ideology when it goes to the extremes. So that's more solid explanation as to why all these Red Pill creators support Russia. Maybe they just don't really care about Ukraine and Russia. They have no attachment to it. And they say, well, this gets me more views. And they like the idea of fascist leaders like Putin, rather than them thinking, oh, Andrew Tate, he's for Russia. Because not all of them are for the Palestinian cause, or in reality Hamas, which also Andrew Tate is promoting all the time. You do have some backlash against that within other Red Pill creators. So a lot of them support Israel against the Palestinians. But no, I'm not really buying it because, yeah, maybe some of the comments under Michael Sartain's videos are Russian bots, but in general, you don't see much support from his own audience. And he collaborates with a lot of people who openly support Russia, and he's on their podcast. Fresh and Fit is a good example. So yeah, not really buying that that's the reason.
Isn't Zelensky himself Jewish?
I don't know if he is, but my point is like, the point is like,
the idea that he's supported by Nazis is ridiculous.
It's absurd. Like, it's so crazy
nonsense.
that people think that are there neo-Nazis in Ukraine? Not as many in the United States. We got a fucking ton. You want to check my Twitter? Check out my Twitter mentions. They hit me up every day. No, dude, like, it's just such nonsense.
Obviously, I agree with Michael Sartain. It is complete nonsense. But in order to have a conversation with people who believe it, there's no logic. Maybe even ironically, you say a lot of them support Nazism, fascism. If they actually thought Ukraine was really Nazi, they'd be supporting them. That's the ultimate irony.
For those of you who don't know, this is the truth. If you guys want to believe anything else, this is the actual truth. You can criticize this all you want, but you are not going to be able to use evidence to criticize this. What happened was that Russia, after the Soviet Union fell, had the opportunity to pivot out of petroleum, but they chose not to. They chose to go heavier into petroleum. The oligarchs who put Putin in power, many of them are petroleum billionaires. These people altogether are more powerful than Putin, but Putin's more powerful than any individual one of them. They're the ones who inflate his raft. Do you understand? They're the ones who lift him up to maintain his presidency. Got it? What happens is he is now beholden not to any one of them, but to all of them together. He's beholden to them. So he must keep gas prices at a certain level, and he must be able to sell petroleum.
Okay, this is basically an explanation of how Russia's economy is dependent on resources, basically.
About 25% of the GDP of Russia is petroleum. Look it up if you don't believe me. Okay, it's a ridiculously high number. Now,
yeah, it's mainly dependent on resource extraction.
What happens is over time, Ukraine, he's got pipelines that go through Ukraine, and he has a very pro-Russian government in Ukraine. So he's shipping oil through Ukraine. His biggest single buyer of petroleum is Germany. So you have to go through Ukraine to get to Germany.
Yeah, it's not really true to say he had a pro-Russian regime in Kyiv. At times he did, but then he had pro-EU governments that got elected. I think he's probably talking about the period around 2010, 2014 when Viktor Yanukovych was in power.
So people are buying there. The Ukrainian government, they start to become a little anti-Russian. They raise the...
a little anti-Russian. I think they became more pro-EU. And, you know, I made a video back in December 2021 from Kharkiv and basically outlined just before this extended invasion began what the reasons were for the conflict. And just to distill it down, really, it's about economics. From the Ukrainian point of view is that, you know, being Russia has meant that they've stayed poor relative to the countries that made a beeline to join the European Union in the 1990s. So countries like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, those three Baltic states were also in the Soviet Union. And Ukraine didn't make that decision in the 90s to push towards joining the European Union. As a result, its GDP per capita is many times less than those countries. And those countries have a GDP per capita that's actually higher than Moscow. Never mind Russia in total, it's more than double of Russia, but it's even higher than Moscow nowadays. So that's basically the choice that Ukrainians are looking to. We stay in the Russian sphere, which hasn't worked out so well, or we go to the European Union sphere and join that, because look how well Poland and the Baltics have done. And a lot of Ukrainians were already going to work in Poland, and they get there and they say, hey, why do these guys have an economy so much better than ours? That's the decision that they made back in the 90s.
And then the worst thing in the fucking world happened to Russia. The Ukraine figured out that they have the 20th largest oil supply in their own country that no one is accessing. They don't have the technology to access all this shale oil that's there. So Ukraine realizes, number one, we're not going to be pro-Russia anymore. We're going to say, hey, NATO, do you want to date us? Can we join you guys? And number two,
Ukraine had been trying to join NATO way before this, in the 2000s, after the Orange Revolution, which took place in 2004. There were allegations of election rigging, fake election in 2004, and they eventually had a third round runoff. Viktor Yanukovych then lost. He will have been seen as more pro-Russian, and he lost to Viktor Yushchenko, who had a more pro-EU mandate. And actually, he'd been poisoned in the lead up to the elections, allegedly by the Russian FSB. And what's ironic then, in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, when he won the election, he actually didn't really have a pro-Russian mandate. He said he would sign the association agreement with the European Union. That's actually the mandate that he ran on, that he campaigned on. And then at the last minute, he decided he wasn't going to sign it. He was going to start signing stuff with Russia and basically take Ukraine back out of that slightly leaning towards the European Union pathway that they were on, and bring it all the way over to being in Russia's orbit fully again. That was basically what sparked the Euromaidan protests in late 2013, eventually led to the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych in around February. It was in February 2014.
hey, Texaco, Shell, do you guys, some of you Western oil companies, do you guys want to come over here and extract some of this oil? Mm-hmm. So two things will happen. We're going to shut down the pipelines of Russia selling their oil to Germany, and we're going to sell Germany our own oil. Yep. Of course they invaded Ukraine. Yep. There's no possibility that they weren't going to invade Ukraine. There is absolutely no...
This is a little bit off point. And probably if Viktor Yanukovych had stayed on in power, then they would have been able to persuade the Ukrainian government not to cut off their conduits to selling their own resources in the European Union. But it's a bit like what he's arguing is like Mexico finds a lot of, I mean, I think Mexico already has oil anyways, but they found a huge amount of oil, and Canada also has oil. The major competitors to the US has to invade them. No, there are alternatives to that. You could have a better relationship with them and make sure that you're able to negotiate a good rate. That's the alternative, right? Or you diversify your economy and focus on other things, or you build new pipelines and you sell it to the Chinese and the Indians, which is what Russia has done since they can no longer sell their resources so much to the European Union. They just found other markets, and it's more expensive, yeah, but you don't actually need to invade another country because they're going to be a competitor economically.
No way. Russia, one more time, has the same GDP as fucking Mexico. Russia would be absolutely decimated if they didn't control this problem.
Well, their economy still hasn't collapsed 2 years later, even with the sanctions. They would have lost a lot of money if Ukraine had refused to sell on their oil or their resources, gas, oil, whatnot. And we're charging very high rates to do that. Of course, it would have had an economic impact, but they could have found alternatives. They could have diversified their economy. There are lots of alternatives to war. Russia is focused on war because it doesn't want Ukraine to be able to leave its sphere of influence, which now is actually what this war has fully resulted in, since Ukraine is now a candidate country for the European Union, which was unlikely to happen before the extended invasion in 2022. And then the NATO point, because he said, oh, they want to date NATO. NATO basically serves as a security system for countries that want to leave Russia's orbit, because if you're not in NATO, like Ukraine wasn't, and you want to join the European Union and leave Russia's orbit, then how are you going to protect yourself? Because the Article 5 of NATO means that, in theory, let's take a country like Estonia. If Russia attacks Estonia, which now has obviously completely left Russia's orbit, then the other countries are obliged to come and help. So the idea is that the US will be obliged to defend Estonia, so Estonia doesn't have to stand there on its own and try and resist a Russian invasion, which they would have very little chance of surviving, but with obviously the US military support as well as the other allies like Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Poland, then they would be able to do that. And the problem is that if you're trying to leave Russia's orbit, particularly now that Russia is stronger than it was in, say, the 1990s when the Baltic states made their beeline for European Union membership, that if you're not in NATO, then you're in a lot of trouble because, well, basically you don't unlikely be able to defend yourself, although Ukraine's done actually a lot better than people expected so far. Just a little anecdote, it was 20 years ago at this point that I met the former president of Estonia at dinner when we were in Washington, D.C. His name was Leonard Meri, and he actually told me at the time when Putin was quite popular in Washington, D.C., because there had been the perception that Putin had stabilized Russia after the Yeltsin years. He told me anyways that I shouldn't be so sanguine about Russia and that Russia in the future will be stronger again and they will invade every part of the former Soviet Union that is not in NATO and doesn't do what it wants. And that is basically what has happened since then. The countries are not in NATO, so obviously he, as the Estonian president, pushed for NATO membership, not just joining the European Union. And also, Leonard Meri told me that he didn't believe that France and Germany would come protect Estonia if they got invaded, but that the US would. Interesting, as we sit here in 2024, hopefully that is not tested. Georgia didn't do what Russia wanted, wasn't in NATO, got invaded. So many other countries probably face the same fate. Ukraine obviously is the other big example that we see.
But the problem with the nuclear stuff is it's not like you just like throw it in the freezer and it's fine. Mm-hmm. You have to maintain that shit.
But you don't think they have some that still work at least?
And I just don't understand how people think that Russia is just able to maintain this level. Like you would have to spend so much money to keep these things afloat. I'm talking hundreds of billions of dollars. And you're just telling me they had 7,000 ICBMs at one point. I just don't think that they're able to maintain this. When you look at how shitty their army was for a while, I'm just sorry. I just have an issue with it. Now, do they have one or two? Maybe I might see that. But here's the main thing. The point you made up of the Nord Stream pipeline. If there's deniability, what I'm saying is the Russia tries to invade Ukraine. They get to Kiev. They almost get to Kiev. And then all of a sudden, their entire front, all of their tanks are just eviscerated one night. And the Ukrainian army's like, we did it. And they're like, no, those were F-35s. And we're like, do you have a picture? Can you prove it? Mm-hmm. That's my point. What I'm saying is there's
I see what you're saying.
My point is Germany, Finland, Denmark, France.
My concern is not about us pushing them out of Kyiv. My concern is pushing them out because listen, Russia sees it different. They see Kyiv and Crimea differently.
Yeah,
they tried to take Kyiv. They couldn't. They just backed out. Didn't even matter.
Well, those take the other half of the country.
My concern is
how does a country 4 times bigger than the other one not be able to take Kiev? How does this taking over a year? I'll tell you why. Because they're not good. They don't know how to prosecute a war.
Listen.
Well, there you go. We obviously agree about that. That's just ipso facto at this point. Russia is 4 times the size of Ukraine in terms of population. In terms of population, probably 3 times, probably in terms of the economy, should be more than 4 times bigger, and definitely has a military that at the beginning of the war was way bigger. They haven't gotten very far in reality. They're clinging on to the land bridge. This is the land bridge between Crimea and Russia that runs along where Mariupol was, along the Sea of Azov. And they obviously have some more of the Donbass region that they've taken, probably not the most strategic part. I mean, this interview was a few months ago, but the front lines haven't changed in terms of territorial control that much since then. I think they changed 0.01% overall. They really don't have much to show, and they're going to still have to try and cling on to this at huge expense going forward. So definitely they are not particularly good at prosecuting war. And I think the point that Michael Sartain is trying to get at here is if there was a nuclear escalation, would the Russian nuclear arsenal even work? And they probably, he's speculating, no, that it wouldn't work. So at the end of the day, the probability is very low, extremely low that there's a risk of a nuclear war that we agree on. And that Russia obviously so far, and then has had a terrible military in this war. They can obviously learn from their mistakes and get better and then overcome that over time. So I don't want to be too denigrating of the possibility Russia learns from its mistakes. That would be a fatal mistake to make.
No one's doubting Russian conventional military is garbage.
Yeah.
The concern is at what point are they willing to use escalation for nuclear weapons? I don't think they would do it for Kyiv. Worse, I mean, you've been hearing the reports.
Yeah.
There are some Ukrainian militias that are attacking within Russia.
I don't think that the United States would back a conventional war by Ukrainians into Moscow. In order to go to nuclear war, you need to believe that Vladimir Putin is so irrational that he would be willing to do that. And the problem is those oligarchs, remember, that are keeping him afloat, their families die too.
Russia is directly fighting with its military against their neighboring country.
It's not, in Afghanistan, they fought specifically.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's not that different. But we did help the Mujahideen defeat the Russians, and I feel like feel like we're so much more technologically advanced than that point, and so are the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have a better military than the Afghans did in '83.
No, of course.
And the United States is more militarily stronger than they were in 1983.
I guess the issue is that Russia never really saw parts of Afghanistan as its own with Russian speakers already there. Russia sees Crimea very differently.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're going to back off as simply.
Crimea, yeah, but I'm talking about Kiev.
No, they're not going to get Kyiv. The issue is that the war's still going on. They're not in Kyiv right now.
Oh, but here's the problem with the oil problem. The oil problem doesn't go away unless they get Kiev.
So you think Russia's just going to continue
really
this?
think,
Wow.
You don't think that the land grab of half the country isn't going to be worth something? There's
Well, no,
no
his
oil
argument
that
is they got to take the whole thing to transfer the oil.
Well, yeah, to make sure that they don't lose it. Yeah, it's not lose out on their money. But I feel like the land is still a lot of money.
Here's what happened, dude. You went in like with a pair of tens, and you just went all in, and you figured out the other guys have aces, and you can't.
It's true.
You can't back out. That's what he's done.
So how does this make sense from the Russian point of view?
So here, I tend to agree with Michael Sartain. The problem is that now that Putin and Russia have unleashed this extended invasion, it's very hard for them to extract themselves from the war, definitely in the long term, with the current lines of control, because they have so little to show for such a huge investment of material, economic might, and obviously human lives. To just have gained the land bridge to Crimea basically is the main thing that they've gained out of this extended invasion so far. So they basically want to take or control all of Ukraine. And then, Moldova, unless Moldova comes up with a strategy, now they actually have had time to develop a strategy. Maybe they just reunite with Romania when they see the Russian troops on the way, organize a quick referendum, and then they've got that NATO security, Article 5 security guarantee, because then they would be, if they joined Romania, united with Romania, obviously be part of Romania and part of NATO automatically, and part of the European Union. Russia would then focus attention on attacking the Baltics, undermining NATO. They may even do that possibly within the next year before those NATO countries have time to build up their defenses. It's still, I think, a low probability event, but still possible. That's just the nature of an imperial mindset. They're going to keep going until they are definitively stopped. And basically for Russia, at this point, they've still lost. I know that Vladimir Putin, when he made his de facto declaration of war speech, maybe it was about 2 or 3 days before the extended invasion, he used this very vague terminology like demilitarization, denazification. Russia views all parts of its former empire that have left to be illegitimate, right? So, there was a lot of noise made in some parts of the media, which was kind of funny about, wow, does Russia want Alaska back now? Because they sold, obviously, Alaska to the United States back in the 19th century. That's not what I think is their initial aim anyways, is basically to say that, we don't recognize any of the borders or any of the independence of any of the countries that were ever once of Russia, the Russian Empire, as being legitimate. Basically, they're just like basically opening already the way to attacking other countries. So there definitely is a possibility that happens. Low probability, I think, just because Russia is so bogged down in such dire straits in Ukraine itself militarily that opening other fronts would just seem completely ridiculous strategically. But let's see what happens.
Technology.
I truly think this is what happened. He lives in a closed society, Putin does, and he expects when he says something doesn't go on social media or in state-run media that's it. And he doesn't understand that his people are using VPNs and they're using mirrored sites to actually look at websites they're not allowed to look at. Same thing in China. I've heard this theory before that Vladimir Putin legitimately believes his own state-run media, and that's the reason why he's been convinced into thinking that this invasion was a good idea.
Yeah, that's also plausible that Vladimir Putin is detached from reality. He doesn't seem to really have a good grasp on the reality of the situation. He didn't understand Ukrainians, that was for sure. Maybe he understood Western resolve, Western resolve isn't the same as it was a year ago in terms of supporting Ukraine, but Ukrainians, he completely underestimated. They were not waiting to welcome in the Russians as liberators. Obviously, they see them as invaders and aggressors. And the possibility of some friendly reconciliation between Ukraine and Russia is basically not going to happen for a long time as a result of this invasion.
There is no fucking way that, I don't care what a Putin supporter you are, there is no fucking way you're going to tell me that Vladimir Putin was like, we're going to invade Donbass and it's going to take us 14 months to take Kiev. There is no way you're going to convince me that Vladimir Putin intended for this war to take over 18 months for him. It took us 3 goddamn weeks to take Baghdad. Mm-hmm. And you're telling me that he expected that to take 14, 15, 16 months in order to take Kiev? You're a fool if you believe that shit. Yeah. There is no way this is what Putin wanted. There is no way.
So again, I can completely agree with Michael Sartain. If you look at the trolling comments I get under my videos and react to the pro-Russian Lord Hahas, who just propagate incredibly dumb propaganda. They claim the Ukrainian military is about to crumble every few weeks. And now we're up to 2 years. And you still have all these comments, Russia's winning. It's always been the plan. It's absolute rubbish. We're now up to almost 2 years.
There is no way. You'd have to be a moron to believe that shit.
This is why
100% you are a moron if you believe that.
That's why I think we're actually in a position of strength to negotiate if we wanted to at any time. Because their objective was to take the entire country. Like you said, they never thought they would be in this situation.
Of course not.
The problem is like the people who advocate to continue send aid and continue the war, we never get an end point.
At that point, if you go into Russia, then you don't.
We need to define something. But the problem is, we won't even define that. See, at least you're giving me something.
Again, because we think we're winning. Again, 2 people are at the negotiating table. The next person who talks is the weaker person. That's where we are right now, because both sides can see a way out where they win militarily.
Yeah, I agree with Michael Sartain. Again, both sides. Russia still believes that they can win, that they can take most of Ukraine, if not all of Ukraine, and obviously then control maybe as a puppet state the rest of it, and then Russia will want to move on and invade other parts of Europe, whilst Ukrainian side also believes that it has a pathway to victory and to removing Russian troops from all of the jure Ukrainian territory. So absolutely everything, Crimea and Donbass. The time frames for both of them are a lot longer than they thought before, but both sides believe they can win. So, what's the end point? What's the end state? No one's going to define that. Both of them have demands, basically, which amount to pretty much total victory.
Without negotiation.
I would argue Putin has already lost because he was trying to take Kyiv. So he's already losing.
Yeah.
This is not...
But if you go online right now, most people think that they're going to win.
They're stupid.
I agree. I totally agree.
Well, whether they're stupid or not, maybe that's a bit too flippant, but they're definitely making pretty bad calculations. The probability is that Ukraine will eventually win this war and remove Russia. It is too costly for Russia over the long term. It's basically completely irrational, their behavior already, and Russia risks fracturing itself and maybe even collapsing potentially if they continue with the war. And it's obviously debilitating their economy over the medium to long term. That's pretty clear. So if you want to see another example that's from a more extreme point of view, that's the Taliban versus the US. The US, after 20 years, they just basically had to leave because it wasn't sustainable. Yeah, Taliban didn't have a military like the Ukrainians, and Russia doesn't have a military like the US does. So
let me make these statements again. Number one, Russia will never take Kiev. It will never happen.
Again, Michael Sartain pretty much on the money. If they couldn't take it back in February, March 2022, Russia is very unlikely to ever take Kiev. It's a massive city. The number of troops they would lose to trying to take Kiev will be astronomical, will probably dwarf what they've lost so far in this war. And actually, even to get there, probably it would be necessary where they've already had to take Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and those cities combined are probably between 3 and 4 million people pre-war population. They're absolutely enormous. Maybe they would even try to take Odessa before that, another city of 1 million. So chance of it happening extremely, extremely slim. But Russians still believe, and their government still believes, that they will eventually prevail.
The delivery of those F-35s starts in 2024. Once that happens, there is no possible way. Well, the United States has Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, and they can easily fly F-22s and F-35s over the Ukrainian airspace from there. Once that happens, there is no way for Russia to be able to defend itself from Ukraine if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO. That's why they have to invade now. That's another thing. We're going to lose the ability to sell oil to Germany.
So this is a red herring because Ukraine was not about to join NATO prior to the extension in 2022, and it was even debatable they would ever have joined the European Union. The reality is, without getting a membership action plan, you're not joining, not joining NATO, and they still haven't got any of that. Even after this war, we're 15 years later, so that was not going to happen. It may potentially happen now that Ukraine joins NATO.
Ukraine is going to be able to sell their own oil to Germany, which is going to cut us out, which is going to make us even poorer. And Ukraine may become a NATO country having U.S. military assets within the country on the border of our nation. These are three completely unattainable goals that we cannot possibly stand. So they had to invade.
Again, they did not have to invade. This is not true. That Ukraine wasn't going to join NATO in any sort of realistic time frame.
When the NATO countries have stealth capability, they're going to be able to attack Russian assets, and the Russians are never going to be able to prove who did it. Mm-hmm. They're never going to be able to prove who did it. What will happen is the day the Ukrainians push their front forward, that day they're going to be, oh yeah, we used artillery and we blew up your entire front. And they're like, no, those were F-35s. I'm like, prove it, bitch. You haven't. Where's the proof? You can't prove anything. All your people are dead. And it's going to happen a couple of times, and Russia's going to call foul and be like, no, it was the the first time that Ukraine wins a decisive battle against Russia, Russia is going to cry foul that the United States stepped in to help them. But the problem is that I don't think that's enough to declare nuclear war. You're not going to have any sentiment to do something like that. And China doesn't want nuclear war either. There's a bunch of countries that don't want nuclear war. And I also think the Russian people who support Putin don't want nuclear war. I think it's one of these things where it's just like he stepped on his own dick. He didn't recognize what he was doing. He was way too pot committed, and now he's in deep shit, and he doesn't know how to get out of this. And there's no way he can maintain his Vladimir Putin-ness and back out of this war.
Yeah, I'd agree with that overall, that Vladimir Putin probably just can't back out at this point. I thought early in the war that he would be, if he just cut his losses right at the beginning. That would have been the more sensible thing to have done and just gone back to the lines of contact on the 24th of February 2022. If he'd done that within the first 2 months, then he could just say, oh, we did X, Y, and Z. Now we've solved the problem with these vague terms about demilitarization, denazification. And that would have been the smarter thing to do, but he didn't. And probably because he lives in an information bubble and he's detached from the reality on the ground and wasn't able to react in time. Maybe he's smarter than I give him credit for, and he's going to figure out a way to lose the war and stay in power, probably by creating a completely totalitarian state in Russia, so like an enormous North Korea over the medium to long term. That's another possibility. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Michael Sartain, pretty impressive. The bar is extremely low in the red pill manosphere community for geopolitical analysis, and in particular this Russo-Ukrainian war. But yeah, overall, he's pretty good. He does have some rather facile explanations for why certain things are happening, and especially about the relationship between NATO and Ukraine. He doesn't seem to really understand that Ukraine wasn't going to join NATO. That's just a Russian excuse, basically. And Russia's fully aware that Ukraine was not likely within 30, 40, 50 years, from what I could see, because they weren't on track to actually join the European Union even for probably 20 years. I mean, I gave a presentation at the University of Karazin in Kharkiv, and the goal then was to join the European Union by around 2030, and they fell way behind that. So at the time, it was looking, if we go back to February 24, 2022, Ukraine even joined the European Union. I would have said, if it happened before 2040, it probably would have been decent progress, never mind joining NATO. So on some of these things, and yeah, there's some valid points, like there would have been potentially economic competition between Ukraine and Russia, but he's missed the main point, is that Russia is an empire. Its people are imperialist, the majority of them. That's why the war is still popular in Russia, even though the whole thing is a train wreck, and they only have the land bridge between Crimea and Russia to show for it after all this time, and all the hundreds of thousands of people who are dead. Remember that Ukrainians and Russians, at least Russians, try to claim that they're brotherly nations, so why, it's not like there's centuries of really virulent hate between them, like you might have between some other countries, like maybe Armenia and Azerbaijan, for example. Most European countries were empires. Not big ones like France, United Kingdom, Germany was an empire. One says the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, Italy. And the reason they stopped being empires is because they lost. In general, you can say the US was also an empire at one point. I mean, an empire in the sense of like invading its neighbors and annexing territory. But in general, the reason that most empires appear to stop is because they lose, and it becomes very expensive to maintain the empires and all these constant wars. And eventually they just reconcile themselves to building good economic relationships with their former colonies and maybe exploiting them in a new way afterwards, which is what Russia could have done with Ukraine, but instead, it decided to invade in both in 2014 and 2022. And that is going to mean reconciliation between Ukrainians and Russians is probably not possible for a few generations, I would say. And Ukraine's future path is now clearly towards an accelerated accession to the European Union, and probably, assuming that they win this war, actually joining NATO in the medium to long term. So terrible strategy by Putin, as it turned out, and Michael Sartain more or less agrees with me. So yeah, overall, pretty good, and definitely within the space, which is, as he described, most people are morons. Yeah, low bar, but on point overall. So I've come up the road from Odessa to Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, another country that could be affected adversely by the geopolitics and by Russia going forward, but hopefully, fingers crossed, that isn't the case for the people of Moldova, like it's been tragically for the people of Ukraine over the last, 10 years, if we look at the Russo-Ukrainian war. And I'm up here because I have a client who is getting Moldovan citizenship by descent. Not something that is particularly common, but I have a kind of special type of client who wants to come here and live these in-person experience with me in what I'm dubbing New Europe. So put a video up above on a card down below in the video description, tell you a little bit more about that. But it's basically the region between Russia and Germany, so all that part of Europe in between. So countries like Poland, the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Obviously here Moldova, Romania, Ukraine, so countries like that. And got me thinking, because I actually have a client who's invested in Michael Sartain's programs, and it's kind of interesting to contrast. Like, there are definitely things that he preaches that, not about the war, or about geopolitics, but about attracting women, basically. And he emphasizes having very good Instagram. 100% agree with that. It needs to be populated with content that represents your value and can display it, communicate it. And also having pre-selection, basically having other women that you socialize with, because evolutionary biology, women are more attracted to men that already have women than kind of the lone wolf, shall we say. So all that makes sense, but you need to be a bit more nuanced about who you're trying to attract in general. Like, I can't really relate to the dating market back in the United States. It's a long time since I lived there. It's over 20 years now, and what I hear from my clients is a bit like a dating dystopia. Like, it's a complete disaster, the whole thing. And, obesity is out of control, overweightness, so I get all that. I can see that was even a major issue 20 years ago when I used to go to university, went to grad school in Washington, D.C., and, the stats say it's even got worse since then. So, and I understand that, cities like Las Vegas tend to, if you're out trying to get the Uber hotties there, it tends to be a certain type of girl. I would describe them as quite plastic, fake boobs, probably got the duck lips and fillers. To be frank, it's not my type of girl at all, but teach their own. Michael Sartain seems to enjoy that kind of look, and I'm sure that he's probably qualified to explain to you about how to attract that kind of woman. He has a girlfriend who fits into that genre, and that's the thing. If you are looking for that type of girl, then maybe that's the right service to go for. But if you're looking for a girl that's maybe a bit more natural in terms of her beauty and probably got better set of morals than many of the girls that featured on all these podcasts by all these red pillars or manosphere dating gurus or networking gurus or whatever way they want to describe themselves, but a lot of them are involved in some sort of sex work. They're either doing OnlyFans or something more than that. It's not really the set of moral values that personally I would be looking for. And that is what I work on in terms of creating content for my clients and helping them know how to create content that's going to attract women who are, a bit different, a bit more the good girl kind of style, still very beautiful, but probably more the type of girl that you want to bring home to your mom and have a serious long-term relationship with than maybe that type of kind of more plastic bimbo who, who hangs out in that kind of scene in a place like Las Vegas. Not trying to say everybody's like that, but that is kind of the stereotype. And with a different style and different type of Instagram and maybe a different type of pre-selection, then that's what you're gonna, you're gonna attract different types of people and definitely different types of women. Getting a photo shoot beside a G-Wagon when you don't look like you're a mafioso, probably not going to do it in terms of attracting the good girls of this region. And I actually test that with, lots of beautiful models that I know here in the region. I show them the photos. I mean, a good example was Andrew Tate before he got arrested and detained in Romania. I showed a lot of girls his Instagram. It was also completely deleted his Instagram by that platform. And the girls were not into him. Actually, one of the main objections I got back was like, he looks dangerous. They were not impressed at all in general. A lot of young guys are impressed by his content, but not apparently the kind of more pretty good girls in this region. And that safety objection is kind of interesting in hindsight when we look at about what happened in Romania and what he's been arrested and currently on trial for. So this is what I help my clients with. They are guys who are high level, who are looking to spend 3 to 12 months here in a city in what I call New Europe. Can be here in Chisinau, Moldova, can also be up in Riga, in Latvia. Latvians are some of the tallest people in the world and some of the blondest. So definitely the land of the leggy blonde up there. Also other parts of the Baltics, the 3 Baltic states. You got Lithuania and Estonia. You got Warsaw, the capital of Poland, and it has a very large diaspora of Ukrainians and also a very big community of Belarusians who've come from the neighboring countries. So it's not just about socializing with the pretty Poles there. It is also about meeting the cute Ukrainians and the beautiful Belarusians, and also been going over to the steppes of Central Asia to Kazakhstan, Astana, and Almaty. Really great an interesting place to visit. Almaty is so beautiful with the nature around it, and it's chock-a-block of very friendly Kazakhstanis. So obviously more an Asian look. It's about maybe 85% Asian in cities like Almaty and Astana, maybe about 15% European. So a little bit for everybody's kind of taste. And what do I do with my clients? This is a premium introduction to these cities. Not only am I going to help you with your Instagram, creating all that content, populating, and make sure that you display your high value that I know that you have if you come and live the in-person experience with me. You're also going to avoid being Billy No-Mates. And that is one of the biggest complaints I get from guys who come to this region in general, because unless you speak the local language already pretty well, or you have a lot of friends here who are mixing the right social circles, it is very difficult in the beginning. So that is something that you don't need to worry about with your Irish boy here. We're going to be like local celebrities. We're going to go out to the places that I think are the best fit for you. It's not going to be, something like Michael Sartain would say, we're not going to be standing outside in a line for a general admission club. We're going to be in at the VIP, basically, at the best spot in the city. We're going to party with my crew. So you're going to have that social circle to tap into already. Basically turnkey when you arrive here. Get off the plane. Maybe it's in Chisinau, maybe it's in Almaty, maybe it's in Warsaw, maybe it's in Riga. And yeah, you're going to have an unforgettable time. You're going to understand what all this region is about, and you're going to have access to my encyclopedic knowledge of the region, of its people, of its culture, and obviously, as you learned today, the geopolitics of the region. And we're going to obviously party hard and get to meet the uber hotties of this region, because this is the region that, in my opinion, has on average the most beautiful women. So it has all that going for it. Obesity not an issue here at all. It's very unusual to see people who are overweight. So obviously, you still have a lot more healthier people in many ways here in New Europe, whether it's in Chisinau or somewhere else, than back in the core Anglosphere, I'd say. I wouldn't say it's everywhere in, the West, as a lot of people try to refer to it is, but the reality is that the core Anglosphere, especially United States, and Canada, UK, overweightness is absolutely shocking. And, that's one of the core differences, I would say. Here, one of the main things that are going to strike you once you land on the tarmac. As I finish up here today, sunset probably in another 30 minutes. It feels like the summer. We got the summer spirit already here in Chisinau, in Moldova, because as you can see, spring has come a bit early. It's really in bloom, and I'm super pumped and looking forward to summer 2024. So down below in the description to this video is my application form for the in-person experience. Go fill it out if you think that you are a good fit for this kind of experience. And it could be you with me pretty soon. In the words of a Canuck ice hockey legend, Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But before you take that shot, and if you are new to my content here on YouTube, please go and check out a few playlists. I can put 3 of them there. First one we're going to put up is a series of vlogs to the cities that I go to with my clients. Second one is like a series of tutorials for dating the uber beautiful of this region, the Olympian level of beauty, the 9s and 10s. In this part of the world, we're not talking about 3s, 4s, and 5s. We're going for that top level. At least we're aspiring for that. And finally, we have my Vodka Vodcast playlist. There's over 50 hours of content there in which I dive deep into the mindset of the people of this region. So go check all that out before you fill out an application form. And very soon it could be you with me and my crew having an unbelievable and unforgettable experience here and leading on hopefully to many, many, many years of excitement in this region. So I will bid you a Usara Buna, a pleasant evening, or Usara Plakuta from Chisinau in Moldova.
SAR Experience.